Well, so I'm recording our video
Oh,
today,
cool.
and then I'll just instead of having you conference in 3 different times to talk with 3 different groups of students, I'll just
Okay.
embed our conversation in a keynote
Oh, awesome.
so that they can hear all of your wisdom.
Oh, please. Please. Okay. That makes sense then.
So I haven't written down any questions. I just figured we'd talk about coding in the elementary classroom, talk about stuff you've done with your kids, and kind of let things develop organically. That's kind of
Okay.
my
I
jam.
can I can handle that.
I knew that you could, which is why I asked. And I do appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk with
Please.
talk with my students by talking to me.
Of course. No. Anytime, anything for you. That's all
Okay, you're the best. Okay, so let's start here. When did you start integrating coding into your classroom as a teacher, and how did you see it impact the way kids think?
Where did it all begin? I think like I started with code.org like most people did, as far as because it was a preset curriculum and I really didn't have to do much. This was not way back when. It's like 5 years ago when it first came out, but it wasn't as advanced as it was now. It was maybe 1 or 2 units, but it taught the basics of coding and things along those lines. But I think where it really took off was is I guess it's just one of those things where opportunity works out. As I remember I went to ISTE, the big tech conference, and I sat next to these two ladies who had like this weird looking blue robot, and and they were talking all about they needed elementary teachers and things like this. The robots were called Bo and Yana at the time, and I'm like, well, that's cool. So we talked, and they got my information, and then they contacted me, and they ended up they ended up developing into Wonder Workshop, which is the dot and dash robots, and so I was one of their pilot teachers. And I think why that was a big experience for my coding instruction is because I was in there as a teacher. I got to go to San Francisco or Palo Alto and sit with them as they were developing this robot before they launched it to people. And their focus was on like curriculum and how could we make a curriculum? They were really focused, as you could see if you went to their website now, just so
Mhm.
much cool, like centers based task cards. They do a really good job. So that was the first time I made that leap of like, oh, it could be more than just a preset curriculum, because I kind of equated coding to like keyboarding, like, oh, you could do 15 minutes of keyboarding, or now you can do 20 minutes of coding on code.org. And now I was like, oh, now I've got this really cool tool that connects to the iPads, and yeah, it could be incorporated into anything. So through my work with them, I really started to do like a lot of integration as far as like how could I get it into literacy centers, how could I get it into math games, and it just kind of developed from there. And so then since I had that experience, then I was just hunting for any tool I could find to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. So when you talk a little bit more about your centers for me. So like how did you started to make those connections, but I
Yes.
think that's a difficult entry point for a lot of teachers is okay, so I can teach coding, but then that's just a piece of my day and then I'll go teach the content areas. But really I feel like what you've done is that's so cool with kids is really infuse it so that they see that connectedness. So can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that?
Well, I think as most teachers know, or as your students will know, I don't know,
Mhm.
is that
Hopes.
it's it's time, it's the time piece. Whereas you lose so many teachers now that I'm out of the classroom, as far as and like a coach role, because they're so with mandated curriculums and Common Core and everything they're doing, there's just not enough time. So to think of like coding as something extra just didn't make any sense, because there is no more time to teach coding on top of everything else. So I had to find a way to work it in, and I utilized the Daily Five both in math and reading. So my kids were already very independent in the way we managed our class, and they took ownership and could run their own centers and rotations. So it was just a matter of like, okay, so I've got a sight word station. I want them to learn coding. So like, how can I do this? So then it just became very natural for me to be like, oh, well, how about I make like a task card where I pre-write some Blockly code, and at that sight word station, they just get the robot out, they get the little chart paper mat I made out, and then they just start building sight words, or they try to guess the sight word as the rope, plugging coding in, getting that experience of attaching blocks together, and then it's this must be that sight word. Um, and so that's just kind of where it developed. It just naturally
Mhm.
fit in. So and then the thing that is important, it was like less about the coding and the technology. It was like a classroom management routine. It was like once you have that management down and your kids are independent, finding the pathway to get that. I think most teachers are already doing something very well that can easily be tech infused. It's just finding the right tool and opportunity to do it.
Yeah, I agree completely. That computational, I love what you just said about the sight word. So you would program the robot to create the sight word, and then they'd have to figure out what the word was?
Yeah, I mean that would be the entry point, where I would model to them. So I created these chart paper mats with the alphabet on them, and you just had to figure out like what one move was for a robot, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like with the Blockly code, it's like move forward 50. That's usually centimeters. So there was some measurement and thought that had to go into how the mat was made. But once you tinkered with that and got it ready, then I would just like before the week before I'd launch that center, I would just think of the sight words for that week, and then I would write the Blockly code on like a little preset center sheet, and then that would be the station. They'd get out the big alphabet mat, they'd get that out, they'd plug the Blockly code in, and then usually working in partners as they would hit a letter, one of the partners would write the letter down, and then as it kept hitting the letters, then they would say, oh, that must be the word the, or that must be the word that. So they
Mhm.
were coding, they were putting codes together, but they were also working on sight words and recognizing sight words. And then they got really good. It was funny to see like how they'd equate how many blocks there were to how many letters they were. So before they were even coding, they were trying to predict what
Yeah.
the sight word was. Like, oh, there's 5 blocks. Which one of our sight words has 5 letters? So this must be it. And so then all these connections were happening that had very little to do with technology, but the kids were engaged and independent. So it was cool. And then in my class, it always led up to after we'd done that for 3 or 4 months, it gets a little bit stale. So then you'd let those kids maybe spend a week, getting to do the programming themselves. Like
Mhm.
they would write the code in the program and then like screenshot it and put it into Seesaw and show people that they Seesaw, Google Classroom, whatever anybody uses to
Yeah.
share that they did a sight word. So it was always just scaffolding, but then like build, it's got to build. So I'll start off, I'll show you how to do it, and then you can try it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love what you just talked about with that inquiry thinking, like that inquiry mindset that they were trying to guess the word before they
Yeah,
ever ran the program and making those connections without you being there to
right.
explicitly make them. And I just think it's really powerful for every teacher, pre-service or practicing, to see examples of some of our youngest learners
Yeah.
going through those abstract thinking processes. I think sometimes we underestimate the littles.
Oh, completely. And I think that was what was the coolest thing that happened in my class is at the end of, I was big in inquiry. That's why I like that you brought up inquiry and just giving
Mm-hmm.
kids a chance. When you get to the end of a math unit, you're going to have unit tests and things that you have to do. But how do you wrap up that learning? How do you wrap up the end of a writing unit of study or a big comprehension focus? And so you teach them tools throughout the year, right? So there's coding. So we teach them the Dot and Dash robot or Ozobots or Scratch Junior, which is an iPad app. And we would incorporate that into a bunch of different centers. And then with other subject areas, you'd have Book Creator and now you could use Pages and Keynote and all these different apps. And it was really cool that halfway through the year, you'd get to the end of the unit and essentially you'd have on a piece of chart paper on a bulletin board all the different tools that we've taught them, robots, Scratch Junior, all these different apps. And then you give them the chance to just be like, okay, so now for the next 2 days, share out your learning of subtraction. You can make a book about it. You can code. You can make a subtraction game with the robots, kind of like we did with the sight word game. You can code subtraction problems in Scratch Junior. And it was really cool to see them apply that learning. And it was inquiry based. It was high interest. I didn't have trouble with classroom management because they were so engaged, and to see what they come out with would be like wicked cool. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're making me so happy talking about this.
Yeah.
We just talked about last week how we build digital fluency, right? So moving beyond just a functional ability of using technology to, we've provided you with all of these opportunities. Now you decide what's the best vehicle to show what you know. Um,
Right.
So you just like gave the perfect example that
And
that is a thing that happens in real classrooms and not just a thing I'm saying happens.
yeah, I think right now, like in my work, we're doing a lot of, we have a cadre going on in my district since I'm a district level employee. And that's the main thing we're trying to teach people is it's repeated use. Like, so even when we give you an activity that seems like, no way, like
Mm-hmm.
a K1 to an elementary student can do that. They can do anything as long as they have repeated use. You can't just bring out a technology tool, I don't know, once a month and then expect them to have some sort of fluency with it. I mean, you gotta embed it easily into the classroom. And like I
Yes.
said, I feel like most teachers have a structure in place where like technology could easily enhance something. It's just a matter of, talking to the right people and figuring out what that is.
Right. Making that leap.
Yeah.
So when you started implementing coding in your classroom,
Mhm.
did you have any coding experience? Did
Oh
you
God.
know anything about
Oh,
coding?
nothing. I probably still don't know very much. It's just like, because to me, it's not about the coding. And
Mhm.
I'll share a video I didn't that you can share with your students however you want. I did a Ignite talk at ISTE that focused just on this, the 5-minute Ignite talk, just about how you don't have to be a coding expert because it is about the computational thinking. It's
Mhm.
about, it's not, especially in elementary level, especially primary elementary level, it's not about the high level coding. It's about the thinking that it promotes, because embedded in computational thinking is risk taking and iteration and all these words that sound really scary, but it's just about kids giving something a try, having it not work out, trying it a different way, looking deeply, being a problem solver, critical thinking skills. It's like everything that you'd want an elementary student to do. And coding is just that tool that naturally promotes that. So it's not about, I'm not an expert at code at all. Like it's awful. Yeah. I can't, like Java and all those things that the high level people do. It makes my head hurt, but
Yeah.
I appreciate what coding promotes in our youngest learners, which is just like deep thinking practice.
Well, and what you just expressed, was my experience in secondary. I
Mm.
had so many kids in my class that were afraid to fail at something. They were so used to like, here's a hard and fast, easy, quick, right answer, and then I can move on. And I
Right.
think that coding cultivates that iterative mindset in a way that other things can't. That
That's so
it's
true.
okay. You're like, there's literally no way you'll be right the first time. Like,
Right.
and I'm like you, I can pretend to code, but like
Oh, yeah.
somebody pulls up Xcode and I'm like, yeah, those words make those symbols make things happen. So I think that's really powerful. That I think it's important for people to remember you don't have to be a coder to teach
Oh gosh, no.
coding, a
No.
programmer. I don't even know if coder is a real word. I need to look that
No.
up.
I mean, both me and you have traveled across the country doing workshops on coding, and I don't, yeah, I don't know. I'm not a coder.
No,
But you just have to get what coding it, like what it promotes and
right.
what it encourages kids to do, and it's amazing. But no, I couldn't code a web, like, yeah, no, not at all. Xcode, scary, yes.
Yeah. But it's important to have good friends that know how to do those things
Oh my gosh,
because you
yes.
need them.
Yes, you do.
So if you could give one piece of advice to a future teacher that's walking into a 21st century classroom, elementary or any level, what advice would you give them?
That you don't have to be the expert, that you're going to learn with them, and that it's okay. That it's that you're going to fail in front of them more than you have successes when it comes to technology or when it just comes to teaching in general. And the more honest you are with them about that, and the more they see you as a learner yourself, it just makes it, that's such a fear. Like when I was in my teaching program, you feel like you have to be the expert on stuff, like that all-knowing teacher standing in front of the rows of desks with all the answers. And what I have found in my, I don't know, 12 or 13 years now is that it's more powerful when they see you as the opposite, when you're a valuable resource to them in their learning, but that you fail just as much as they do. And if you incorporate technology, it's going to fail, because like networks go down and apps crash and websites crash, and mirroring doesn't always work, and you're going to have the best lesson plan in your entire life, and it's going to bomb. And you're going to have to just be able to sit in front of the kids and be like, well, that was awful, and we'll try again tomorrow, and let's just, what do we learn from this, instead of just like, I don't know, instead of pretending like you know everything. I don't know. It's just all about, it's okay to learn with them and not be
Yeah.
the all-knowing teacher.
Yeah. Well, and I think that speaks so much to the growth mindset that great teachers possess. You know,
Right.
that's what we want our kids to do.
Of
So
course.
it's silly for us to not do the same thing.
Of course. Duh. Yeah.
Okay, last question, unless there's anything you want to add that you want to share.
No, I'm good. This has been awesome. Yeah.
In terms of integrating technology, you just talked a lot about this, but you're in a lot of classrooms now and seeing teachers integrating technology. What do you think is valuable about their experience getting to work with technology now in their pre-service program, in the ways that they're getting to work, and how you see that translating into when they get into a real classroom?
Because you won't have to work, as backwards as some teachers who have been in the classroom a long time have, where these technologies weren't available, right? So when I think of like the TPAC framework, where you have to have, content knowledge, you have to have pedagogy or a teaching style, and then you have to have technological knowledge, right, to create this really big 21st century experience. When I walk into teachers' classrooms that didn't have the technological experience, it's a hard backtrack for them, because they see themselves as content experts because they've been teaching something for 25 years, and they're really set in their teaching style, and it feels like technology is cramping their style.
Mm-hmm.
It's frustrating. It's jarring to their day. They could run a classroom in their sleep. They've got a flow, and this just feels like it's disrupting the whole learning environment. And then you have to go in a lot to prove to them, like, but look at how cool this can be and how we can work it in. Whereas pre-service teachers nowadays that are getting these technological experiences while also learning content, while also learning what kind of teaching style or pedagogy they're going to have, it's just such a huge benefit, because you're not going to have to backtrack. And it'll help you bring something to the table, because all these other teachers are going to have experience that it's going to take you 10 years to get. But you could come in and help them and feel just as equal at that planning table as they do, because you're going to know the tools and have this 21st century knowledge that they might not have. So it's kind of like an equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I think it's cool. I wish that I could have had all this available to me back then. Yes.
I know, me too. I was thinking about that today, actually. When I took technology in a college of ed, it was like, here's how you make an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh my gosh, yes, so Microsoft Word. Like, here's how you structure a Word document.
Here's how you make a flyer.
There's a flyer and a newsletter. It's like,
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for speaking to that. I think sometimes it's nice to hear from someone in the field say, this innovative work you're doing right now is going to pay off. It's going to make you a leader, even though you're young.
It's going to pay off. You're young, but this is, it's going to pay off. It's going to be awesome.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Jake Lee,
Woo!
for talking with us.